The Oracl3 Network.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 1693 means we got shots fired. 4:15 AS. Route 291 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here as we come on the air in the West. And we begin tonight with the horrific scene playing out late today in Boulder, Colorado. Those initial reports of a gunman in the parking lot of a grocery store, then moving inside, then reports almost immediately of multiple victims. The first images coming in, the awful scene at this King Soopers grocery store. Authorities say there were calls of an armed man with a long gun in the parking lot. A massive show of force, police swarming the scene still at this hour, surrounding the building. Police seen walking a man away in handcuffs. The governor of Colorado late today saying our prayers are with our fellow Coloradans in this time of sadness as we learn more about the extent of the tragedy.
Shootings or mass casualty events are perhaps the worst acts against humanity. Yet these tragic events occur on a daily basis. The reasons behind most shootings remain baffling to society, and indeed, there is no known motive for so many that we've covered on the Active Shooter podcast. The shooting we will discuss today is one with no motive. Certainly, no explanation has been forthcoming from the shooter. As inexplicable as it is, the mass killing at King Soopers supermarket in Boulder, Colorado on March 22, 2021 was the scene of utter chaos. The dreadful hour of terror was perpetuated by a young man with blood in his eyes and evil in his heart as he ruthlessly murdered 10 innocent people and injured one other before he was ultimately captured by police.
Active Shooter, the podcast, is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. In today's episode, we will be referring to the shooter as Frank.
The King Soopers supermarket, located at 3600 Table Mesa Drive in Boulder, Colorado, was a typical-looking grocery store, located within a larger shopping center. The market wasn't far from a senior living center, a Montessori school, and 2 churches. On Monday, March 22nd, the market was bustling with patrons, as usual. The day was sunny, which was a welcome reprieve from the week of snowstorms the area had experienced leading up to the day. There were approximately 115 people milling about inside the 60,000 square foot supermarket, while another 25 were outside the store in the parking lot. It was about 2:30 p.m. when 21-year-old Frank rode up to King Soopers in a Mercedes C-Class sedan and parked. Despite his young age, Frank appeared much older when he was later described by witnesses. He had dark hair, and a beard and wore blue jeans, a long-sleeve shirt with a green tactical-style vest, when he collected his Ruger AR-556 pistol, which was modified with an arm brace and a 9mm handgun, and exited his vehicle. Though he carried the handgun, it wasn't believed to have been used in the shooting. Without wasting even a moment, Frank began firing his weapon right there in the parking lot. A customer heard the first shot and initially believed someone dropped something, though after the second shot, it was immediately apparent that something far worse was taking place.
First shot, I thought it was an accident. I thought somebody dropped something. Second shot, that question was gone. Third shot, I knew it was gunfire.
Frank strode towards and into the supermarket, where a long line of customers were patiently waiting near the pharmacy for their COVID vaccines. The store set aside times each day for people to walk in for their vaccination, and customers were eager to take advantage. Whether Frank knew about the COVID vaccines and timed his arrival accordingly is unknown, but was certainly advantageous for him. Frank was firing his gun as he entered the store, which naturally had sent petrified customers racing in all directions, desperately seeking a place to shelter, hide, or conceal themselves in any way possible.
They ran upstairs to hide. They hid in a coat closet standing up for 45 minutes. Extraordinarily terrifying. Of course, the little one saying, yeah, and, the coats weren't long enough to hide our feet as they were standing behind the coats in the closet.
People were shouting, "Keep running," and "Don't stop," as they frantically sought to escape the overwhelming fear that was like a physical presence in the room. Frank stalked the aisleways, firing his gun, seemingly at random, though perhaps the movements made some semblance of sense to him.
I just started counting in between shots and listening to see what direction he was heading in. I looked at my son and I told him, we only have 3 seconds. We have to move now. If we don't, we're not going to have another opportunity.
There was a Starbucks inside the supermarket, and inside, a barista was hiding with a coworker. They were frightened to their core, yet determined to survive. Frank walked within about 13 feet of their hiding place, which was behind some large trash can lids. The barista would later describe Frank as paranoid-looking. His head was on a swivel, looking to and fro, and he seemed jumpy. A repairman, Nevin Stanisic, was at the Starbucks working on an espresso machine that was broken down. He was one of the first to be murdered, out in the parking lot near his work van, which unfortunately happened to be parked near where Frank parked that fateful day.
After I was running, I definitely heard more shots. Kind of like pop, 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 pop.
The majority of the shooting and murders were committed within the first 15 minutes of Frank's arrival. It took 15 minutes to an hour to irrevocably change hundreds, if not thousands, of lives forever. After he shot Nevin, Frank saw someone trying to race out of the store and immediately shot the customer multiple times. As he entered the store by way of the eastern entrance, Frank shot 2 more people.
There was probably 30 rounds shot throughout the store. There's absolutely no place in the store to hide.
The scene was the kind of mass confusion and pandemonium one would imagine. The stench of blood and gunpowder hung in the air like a veil of fog, and bodies lay strewn about. It was unreal, like a movie set. Yet nothing could be more real than the immense loss suffered. A woman waiting in line for her COVID vaccine was shot and killed while customers ran for their lives.
Paul was in line to go get a COVID shot. 3rd person in line, and that's when at least one shooter came in and killed the woman at the front of the line in front of him.
There was no time to stop and wait for others. It was everyone for themselves as distressed customers tried to save themselves. On the other hand, Other customers were so horror-struck that they froze in place, unable to propel their body to move to safety. Some hid in storage and supply closets. Others ran upstairs to the employee-only area. And several quick-thinking customers hid behind cardboard signs at the Starbucks. Some stayed hidden for hours while they waited for help to arrive. 5 people sought shelter inside a storage closet and barricaded the door with boxes and supplies, and several others managed to flee out the back door near the loading docks.
Something just happened here, guys. Look, there's people lying in the street, guys. He went in the store. Right down there. Oh, my God. Guys, we got people down inside King Soopers. Holy There's a shooter, active shooter, get away!
Several 911 calls were placed, with one caller reporting that the shooter was in the refrigerator section of the store. Witnesses later described Frank as methodically shooting a few shots before stopping, and then firing again. He wasn't spraying bullets across the store. This seemed like a much more sinister attack.
Once we got outside, I noticed that there were people laying in the street and they weren't moving, and instantly I started running for them. And my son grabbed me and said, "No, we can't do anything. They're out in the open." And so we ran.
By 2:36 p.m., the first 3 officers on scene raced towards the gunfire. Determined to rescue as many victims and survivors as possible, officers entered the store through the roof, which they accessed by a fire truck's ladder that was used to hoist them up. Meanwhile, inside the store, Frank began to fire police, which caused them to return fire. During the shootout, Officer Talley was shot and killed near the bank of cash registers. Other officers tried to retreat for better cover when they noticed that Officer Talley was no longer with them.
All of a sudden I hear some loud noises behind me, and then I heard screaming and shouting, and then I realized, oh my gosh, these are gunshots.
Outside, a second team of 6 officers prepared to enter the store after being notified of the downed officer. After pulling their fallen comrade out of the store, the team re-entered at 2:38 p.m., trailing behind the lead officer, who held a ballistic shield for protection. Only 20 seconds after entering the store, the second team was fired upon. Around the officers, glass exploded as bullets struck it, causing a hailstorm of glass that ended up injuring one police officer. The police gave Frank notice of their presence by calling out using a bullhorn saying, quote, "This is the Boulder Police Department. The entire building is surrounded. You need to surrender now."
Come out with your hands up, unarmed.
The police response was swift and mighty. Officers arrived on scene within minutes of numerous 911 calls that began to flood the dispatch lines. Before long, the entire parking lot was swarming with first responders, as helicopters and drones flew overhead. There were patrol cars, SWAT vehicles, ambulances, and fire trucks everywhere, and it was as chaotic as it looked, with debris and bags of groceries strewn about. Over 150 officers and first responders were at the scene.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
At approximately 3 p.m., an armored vehicle was used to smash through the front windows of the store. An exchange of gunfire between Frank and police immediately ensued and lasted for an excruciatingly long 21 minutes. Police continued to holler to Frank to stop shooting and turn himself in, and finally, he did just that. At 3:21 p.m., Frank yelled out, quote, "I surrender. I am naked." Oddly, Frank had completely disrobed, down to his boxer brief underwear.